Hi, good afternoon. The purpose of this exercise today is basically to show you how to consume a soap service and how to use the output of that consumption to create a REST service. So on my machine, there's a directory in my web server uh, called www. Under this directory, I have a file called school, and on the school I have a file called com6300, and here we can see the coordinator files here, or directories. And so let's go ahead and configure coordinator. Under the application directory, there's a file called config. If we right click it, we can edit it. Now it's already been edited, of course, and I put in the array config, I created a variable called aki service, and aki service is basically a variable that points to where my soap services are located, which is at this address here. Also, you can set things like the server root, which is basically document root, and this is important. I also set my base of my base URL, which is basically, if you notice, is just my web server schools slash com6300. This is basically the directory that my files are located in. After you set up your config.php file, you can also look at the REST. You can also look at REST. Notice that the default format, I told you that REST, you can have many different formats. You can format data in terms of XML. You can format data by text. Using text, you can also format data in JSON. But today we're going to use the default XML to format our data. All right. So now, once we have that set up, we can go back to application, and we can actually go into controllers, and we can create a directory called REST. We can dump all files there. So the first file that we're going to dump is a file called application.php, which basically is a bin that allows us to put all of our REST services. So let's now go and put our REST services there. Now, before we get into the code, let's just run it to see what is the output. So let us now go to a web browser, open it, and then just copy this URL, and let us discuss the URL briefly though. We have http localhost/school/com6300 is basically the directory that I have all of my files in. Then from this point in time, this invoking the default controller of coordinator, which then routes us to the REST directory. I'm now in the REST directory, which I'm now in the PHP application.php file, which then routes me to the service I want to use. Now the service has two parameters. The first parameter is called token, and the value for token is this. Then the second parameter is called application ID, and the application ID is this. Now if I press enter, you're going to notice what happens. You're going to notice that it brings up an output. It tells me that for this application, this is the emergency information. Now, of course, I told you that REST can have different formats. So if you want to see this same information in JSON format, for example, we can simply type in format.json, and we will see it change up. And now we can now see that the data is now in JSON format, which is the most useful format, especially for you, because you're going to be consuming the application using a mobile phone, and in mobile phones we tend to use JSON format a lot. So just note that. Now, so let's go back to the code a minute. Now, the code, notice that in the code we start by saying application extends. Now, notice that application here is a capital A, right? So whatever you have the directory, whatever you have the file name, like I have the file name application.php with a lowercase here, but when I actually created the class, I have a capital A. So class application extends the REST controller, and by extending the REST controller, it allows me to inherit everything that these geniuses wrote, some other part of the world that I can now use all of the functionality without actually coding it myself. So then I have a function called, now I told you that REST has 4 verbs. The verbs are get, put, post, and delete. Today we're only interested in the get. Now get means to really read the resource, to read data from the resource. That's what get means. So whenever you're doing this, you put the name of the resource that you want, which is emergency data, and then you put an underscore. Following the underscore, you put the word get, and then you close brackets. Now, you know that I accepted 2 parameters. I accepted token. So this is basically token here. This is saying this. Remember that the arrow in PHP is equivalent to the dot in Java. So we're saying this arrow get token. So it's basically getting the parameter token, the value of the parameter token. Similarly, this arrow get application data is basically getting the value for the application. Now ID. Now what this F statement is doing is that it's saying that if the token is null and the application data is null, then I'm going to respond by saying a 400. I'm going to throw a 400 error. Now, otherwise, what this is doing, this is saying whenever you see application : this is saying use some function or some value within the class itself, and that value is here. So it's calling this function here called get service applicator, which basically uses it gets a value from the array, from the global array. This is the array that we set just now when we were looking in the the config file. So we created a variable called service ID. So what this is basically doing is storing that value inside of a variable called main URL. And then we are taking that main URL, and we are basically, from the lesson 1, we're basically calling the SOAP client and the service being called application from our service directory. And we are basically calling that and returning the result in something called a key application. So let's go back to the top. So when we get that value now, that value, we're basically now looking at the service. So there's a service called get application emergency data that takes in a token and an application ID and returns all of the results, and returns things like telephone number. Now, of course, to put this into reality, an emergency, and whenever an applicant applies to a university, they have to give next of kin information, somebody that they can contact if something goes wrong. So basically that is this data here. And then we were just basically taking the data that we get back from the service, and we're responding, and we passing back a 200 code, which tells the web browser who is making the request that everything went okay and don't worry about anything, you can go ahead. While a 400 says that something went wrong, and basically they know that to stop. So basically, when we look at the output now, we can basically see that we are running this same REST service and producing the output here. Now, the advantage in this approach is that you have a machine can ask another machine via REST service, can you please tell me the emergency data? And then that data will be passed over in XML format, and then the machine will consume it. Of course, this is different from writing a web page. But a web page, we don't want our data to look like this. We want our data to look more presentable or fancy, text boxes and stuff like that. But when a machine is communicating with another machine, it don't need data to look fancy. It just need to know how to get the data. And basically, so this REST approach is primarily used for machine-to-machine communication. And that's the end of the lesson. I'm going to be putting up this this file online. Thank you so much.